presentation was given throughout the county, north, central, and south, in May when we were getting final feedback on the draft of the comprehensive plan and the Unified Development Code. We had a phenomenal turnout and actually wonderful response with a mapping effort that we did last fall. And these were all tied to the livability principles. This was essentially the operating system for all of the decisions that were made. These were critical pieces that you all had carefully customized to your context and made them prioritize the things that were most important to you. One thing we learned last fall was that of the 6 livability principles, the most important one to you was supporting existing communities. And the critical piece that came out of that was flood management, both protection from future flooding, not building in the future within floodways or within harm's way, and then trying to develop policies for how to recover after floods. The mapping exercise was based on the kinds of places that we find within Doña Ana County. And both from the most natural and preserved, the mountains and the river, to the rangeland and farmland, which are working open lands, and then subdivisions, large lots, we refer to those as homesteads, the colonias, which are very different in character and in built environment and in scale, from tiny little places like Garfield in the north to really robust and very large communities like Chaparral, but very low density, the very compact historic colonias like La Mesa, San Miguel, and La Union and Rodi. All of these communities have different sorts of impacts on the success of the livability principles. When we were building the mapping exercises last fall, you all took tiles that represented those community types and built how you want to accommodate the expected growth over the next 25 years. This is an illustration of how you would, each area, north, central, and south, would look if we continue to grow as we currently are. And in most situations, because of the trends of the last 50 years, you're going to see more single-family detached subdivisions, a few more mobile home parks, and more strip commercial. You'll also see a great deal of industrial development in the Santa Teresa area, which is great for economic development and growth. But your reaction to this type of growth was quite negative, largely because the livability principles score very poorly under these patterns. So in every area, you gave us a list, and you'll see that in these next 3 slides, about what was important to you, and largely because it varied from north to south and from urban to rural. Things that were important in the predominantly agrarian north were quite different than the demands of the Las Cruces metro region in the center and the more urban areas around Sunland Park in the south. So we took the data from your preferences and your mapping exercises and built what you'll see in these next 3 slides, which is your vision for future growth. And this is where you placed the different community types on the map. We consolidated all those maps because you were working at various tables, and this is a consolidated response. Now, the wonderful thing about developing community types is that they are permitted in different areas of what we call a sector plan. There are 3 growth sectors and 2 open space sectors. And each one have a variety of communities that are appropriate within them. So once you had built the preferred scenario plan, this is the sector plan that came out of consolidating all of that work. You have critiqued these plans further, and you'll see in the final comprehensive plan the result of your recent comments. So it's interesting how these different things layer. We talked about the livability principles to begin with and how that informed the scenarios. The scenarios were built based on how they rated with the livability principles. The scenarios then, like we just looked at, shaped the sector plan. And then the implementation device for the sector plan or the comprehensive plan is the UDC, the Unified Development Code, and are essentially your zoning. So all of these things actually are connected from top to bottom, and you just get greater levels of detail as you move through the process. And this image shows how those layers fit together. You see the sector designations at the top and which community types they permit. And then once you get into the UDC, it says which zoning districts belong in each different community type. Now, one thing to bear in mind is there are two types, there are essentially two zoning tracks. It's very similar to what you have now in your existing Chapter 250, and that is you have village districts and you have community districts. The village districts have historically been associated with the historic communities, places that were platted before 1939. But now those are going to become intensity districts, and they're going to be available for use anywhere should a landowner or developer desire to use them. Then there's in the new system, the community districts are going to be known as use districts because that's really what they are. They essentially are either residential or commercial or industrial. And so they're two separate zones. All of the intensity zones are inherently have some degree of mixed use, and all of the use zones are primarily a single use. But it really is up to the landowner, depending on their business model, what they're trying to produce, which system they opt into. And you'll see in the next series of slides the existing zoning that is currently on the ground in the north, central, and south. And the dark or the medium brown color that you see over the majority of the county is the performance district, which is essentially the rural zoning. And then in the next series of slides, you'll see that color becomes green. And within this system, we differentiate colors. So you'll easily be able to see whether you're in the intensity zones or the use zones. The greens and lavenders are intensity, and then the bright colors, the yellow, red, blues are the use zones, just to help people maintain orientation. The one interesting thing that is a little different, and you'll see this particularly in the south, the colonias that had not been map zoned now are. We looked carefully at their existing use entitlements. Many of them had uses permitted within the performance district. We also looked at what was actually developed, some things that had never been permitted but were good uses. And so we mapped what was on the ground. Through this process then, in the evenings, participants critiqued those zoning maps and helped us get it right, because we could only go based on the existing entitlements, and we really didn't have at that point the individual property owners' desires for the highest and best use of their land. And so that was a part of the conversation for the evening, which this slide indicates that for every evening in the public workshops that we critiqued both the sector plan and the zoning map. And then finally, this slide shows you what the next steps are. Just essentially the target dates. We are on a pretty quick timeline now because of the end of the grant cycle. And we will have the second draft of the code, of the Unified Development Code, by June 1, the second draft of the zoning map based on your markups this week, and then the second draft of the sector plan also based on your markups. Then the final series of both the comp plan and the UDC will be ready for public hearings by the end of June, and those hearings will begin in July. Thank you for your input.